if you guys can't hustle together $100,000, I'm not going to introduce you to any of my investors. Which felt harsh at the time, right? But you know, it was great advice. Like, and so, you know, I went and I pitched my uncle, who, you know, I knew had sold some of his cattle in Mexico. Literally, like, I knew he had $50,000 in his mattress, and I'm like, that's the richest guy I know, my uncle. I'll go pitch him. And then, Randy, who do you know? And he's like, well, you know, my cousin is married to a guy who you know, is pretty wealthy, and he's been pretty successful, and I have a good rapport with him. And I remember Randy feeling a little bit like uncomfortable about calling him, and then, you know, working up the courage and doing it. And those are the moments, I think, that are so important, is, you know, taking that leap to do something that's scary or that feels uncomfortable. And, you know, lo and behold, the guy said, come on over, and we drove down there and we pitched him. You know, we had our little presentation, and, you know, we had never done that before, right? And we pitched him, and he's like, okay, I'll put in some money. And I have a few friends who I think, you know, and look, part of it was, sure, he was related to Randy through marriage. But, you know, I think it was an economic decision. He saw us as young and hungry, and he actually had not made any investments in the .com, you know, sort of world. And so I think he saw an opportunity, and he put in money, and then, you know, then that worked, right? So then you
get a little confidence.
Yeah, you're like, all right, who else?
Who's next?
You know, who do you know? And then we just built out from there. Yeah.
Well, and that's, I think, also important for entrepreneurs out there. It's like, you know, the friends and family round serves multiple purposes, but it's that advice from the professor is, if you're not able to convince the people, like, because that's you convincing and getting over all that, those jitters, before you go in front of people who are just literally making a financial decision. So
absolutely.
And then also they do know you, so there's a little bit of that, like, the person, even if your business plan or your that's like, if they're young and hungry, if they really haven't, you know, if they're onto something, you might have a chance with friends. So they call that the friends and family round. That's That's not actually a bad place to start.
That's right. Yeah.
So you guys did that. You get some, you put some money together, and then it's really only 5 years before that. Like, the arc of that story is only 5 years.
Yeah. It was, you know, it was a wild ride, and it was a lot of work, luck, things going well, things going terribly. You know, step one is we had to hire, you know, some engineers to sort of build what we wanted, and we actually, there was 3 people at Raytheon who we had met as new hires, who we really respected and knew were top-notch, like, software developers. Two guys, 1 woman, and we made all 3 of them, you know, offers once we had a little bit of capital, you know, equity plus some cash. And then, of course, we had to pay ourselves because, you know, we needed to live. So we took as low a salary as we could afford, and started building some software, and had this idea for anti-piracy on these file sharing networks. And, you know, my sort of personal goal and mission became to get customers. I had done a little bit of sales training, actually, as a part-time thing. I sold life insurance my senior year of college. I always kind of enjoyed a little bit of the sales, and so, you know, I sort of headed up the sales charge, and Randy was great at, you know, sort of working with the engineers and the product, and yeah, I mean, 1 customer at a time. We started, you know, knocking them down, and we had no relationships in the entertainment industry. It was all cold. But we had an idea that was timely. It was a solution they needed. You know, there was nobody else
doing that.
And so we had an advantage walking in, and, you know, I learned a lesson very young that if you can, you know, if you have something unique, people listen to you, and they'll let you in the door, at least. Gives you a shot. And so, yeah, I mean, we eventually raised some more investment from, you know, from investors, and but we didn't raise that much. I think we raised $2-3 million bucks. We didn't raise any money from venture capital, none, not a dime, because now it was 2000, 2001, 2002. The venture, you know, .com had popped, so there wasn't a lot of venture money to be had. So we got profitable pretty quickly, and then in a few years, you know, this larger anti-piracy company actually wanted to buy us. Their offer was too low, so we said no. We went out and we found a better buyer, and we sold it.
Yeah. Well, that's an incredible, again, 5 years, it feels, I don't know, it may sound like a lot of time, but in business, that's a blink of an eye. I'm curious, were there any big challenges or failures in that first, like, did it just work once you're going, can we hear one of the, because it feels like, 5 years, like that's great, and then you exit for this.
Yeah, no, I mean, 1,000 stories of failure. I mean, the technology solution we had required, it was a combination of hardware and software. So we had to actually set up computers to essentially pretend to be nodes on a file sharing network. Not to get too technical, but basically all the file sharing network was a bunch of peer computers sort of sharing music with each other. All we would do is set up a bunch of computers that would pretend simulate, and that would basically, we called it spoof. We would spoof the networks. So we had about, call it 100 computers set up doing this, which costs a lot of money to buy, and so that's what we use the investment money for. And one day we noticed our network was kind of acting goofy, so we went to the host that was hosting our computers, because these were not 100 computers in the office. Yeah. They were in downtown LA at a facility, and we go down there, and the guy is literally locking up, and he, sort of the owner of the place, he's like, "Oh, I'm glad you guys are here. I'm going out of business." And we're like, "What?" And he's like, "Oh yeah, going out of business. Sorry, you guys need to get your computers out." And again, we have customers. We have a service that's needs these computers. And so we loaded up Randy's Honda Civic with and these were servers. These were
bulky
servers, and we loaded up his Honda Civic and had to move 100 servers in one afternoon. That's just one story of it could have been disastrous. In situations with employees, that didn't work out. I could go all day.
No, that's a great example, and I kind of want to I think as entrepreneurs and as leaders in general, finding the right team. So you have an idea, you get some investment, that's great, but then the people.
Yeah.
How do you, with the pressures of starting something, of having people that have invested their money, how do you create an environment, a culture that's...
Well, we did it, Randy and I did it by trial and error, because we were so young and so inexperienced. I mean, we barely had any work experience. That we did it by trial and error, and we screwed things up pretty badly, I think, early on. For example, I think we went the first 2 years of Media Defender without firing anybody. And we definitely had people who were not performing. And we were just, you wanted to be friends with everybody. We wanted a culture of everybody liking each other. And, we probably sort of merged, business with personal, became friends with these people, because you're starting something and you're 6, 7 people, in this environment that's high intense. You become very close to everybody. So we were terrible at actually managing people for success. So we kept people too long. We shouldn't have kept. We didn't know how to hire people, how to suss out, people who are good versus not. We weren't very diverse. It was all guys. It took us a few years before we hired our first woman. Looking back, I'm kind of embarrassed about it, but at the time we were so young, and it just, we were trying our best to hire as fast as possible the people we just felt more comfortable. I think, again, being young and kind of dumb. That figured itself out over time. Over time, we we read books and listened to advice, and I remember early on, Randy came in one day and he's like, "Hey, I read this book by Jack Welch on management," and so I'm like, "Okay, I'm gonna read it too." And we both read it, and we implemented a bunch of the stuff we read in the book. So
I think also interesting, because I think a lot of leaders, especially in smaller companies, where there hasn't been a lot of management training, there hasn't been even sometimes in bigger companies you can hire in for people who are great managers, but when you're in a small company and you had an idea and you're great at that,
right, exactly,
right, and then you have to manage people, but it's busy. I think it's very important for leaders to hear. You have to keep learning. You got to learn that as well. You got to read the books. And you can't just read the books, but you actually have to say, "Hey, let's do chapter 3 and chapter 4. Let's do those things." So do you remember one thing you implemented that was Oh, that's a good idea. We should try that. Do you remember anything that kind of came out of that time of learning and reading? And
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the biggest one was this concept of, you don't have to, just because you have given somebody a job, you don't have to keep them. It feels terrible to fire somebody. It is the worst thing in the world. I still don't like it, right? Like, it sucks because it's somebody's livelihood. In Jack Welch's book, again, this is sort of dated, and, we've updated our thinking over time, but at that time, he had this concept of, you have your 20% of people in the company, 70%, and then your bottom 10%. And there was this whole theory around transparency, is everybody should know where everybody stands. Because it's not fair to the top 20% performers that they are treated the same as the bottom 10%.
Yeah.
They're contributing more. And the 70% they're valuable. It's not that they're not valuable, but they need to know that if they keep working or keep achieving, that there is this upper echelon that I could get to. And the bottom 10%, you're doing people no service by keeping them at a job they're not good at. It's just prolonging, a difficult, the inevitable, and it's actually hurting them because they're doing something and they're getting paid, so they're getting rewarded, and so they're not going to get better. They're not going to change. It's not good for anybody. So, we implemented that, and it's hard because, I don't know, to me, it didn't come naturally. I think I'm a bit of a people pleaser, so it just didn't come naturally for me to tell people, be transparent about that, and to fire people and to go in and tell somebody you're not gonna work here anymore, or, you're not cut out for this, or these are the issues that I see, and so that was probably one lesson that to this day we try to reward people who are doing well, and if people aren't succeeding at the job, you either give them the skills to succeed or you get rid of them.
Yeah, I think it's also like that idea of it is a disservice to keep someone who's not that's a really important concept. It's as hard as it is, as uncomfortable as it is, it's better for both parties.